Black 47, the third year of the Great Irish Famine, which would eventually claim more than 1 million lives. The year of 1847 would see more than 100,000 Irish flee their country for the distant shores of Canada, with an estimated 1 out of 5 not surviving the voyage. By June of that year, the first famine migrants made it up the St. Lawrence to Lake Ontario, packed into steamships or towed behind in open barges. When they arrived in Toronto, they would forever alter the character of the city. On June 8th, the SS City of Toronto pulled alongside Reese's Wharf and unloaded 700 Irish immigrants. By the end of the week, more than 300 Irish were arriving every day, and the dockside sheds set up to house sick arrivals were soon overwhelmed. By the end of the summer of 1847, some 38,000 famine immigrants had passed through Toronto. More than 1,124 had died. Among those who perished was Michael Power, Toronto's first Roman Catholic bishop, who died tending to his flock in the fever sheds. Bishop Power was interred in a crypt beneath St. Michael's Cathedral, while the majority of the famine victims were buried in a mass grave behind St. Paul's Basilica, Toronto's first Catholic church. It is unsurprising that Toronto's first Irish community developed in the neighborhood surrounding St. Paul's and others like it, which stretched from the Don River west along the harbor. The neighborhoods of St. Lawrence Ward provided affordable housing in close proximity to career opportunities in the city's growing industrial sector. Here, in substandard housing, the city's Irish population struggled to make a home in the New World. Records from the 1860s show that much of Toronto's Irish population lived in poverty, more than 45% being working class, and some working year-round in factories and warehouses, while others worked seasonally in construction or as hackmen or carters. The majority of Irish women worked as seamstresses or house cleaners, while others worked the streets selling foods such as apples and oranges. The majority of Irish citizens earned no more than $1 a day in a time when $4 were needed to support a wife and 2 children at a level just above the poverty line. Living quarters were cramped, with entire families often having to share a single room. With no set means of disposal, animal, human, and industrial waste typically wound up in the gutter. In February of 1866, a reporter from the Globe visited a St. Lawrence Ward slum known as Fish Alley. Here he observed 50 people inhabiting 9 decrepit houses where trash was piled outside the doors and a single privy overflowed into a nearby well. Unsurprisingly, death rates among the city's Irish population were high, with the major causes being tuberculosis, pneumonia, exposure, dysentery, typhus, and cholera. In addition to the challenges of transferring a rural way of life to an urban industrial setting, Toronto's Irish population faced fierce discrimination in the form of the militantly anti-Catholic Orange Order, which held great power in the affairs of the city. The order controlled almost every facet of life in Victorian Toronto and was determined to keep the city British and Protestant at all costs. Between 1852 and 1858, no fewer than 6 major riots broke out between Protestant and Catholic factions, most surrounding parades on St. Patrick's Day and on July the 12th, the anniversary of Britain's victory over Ireland in the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. It was because of this violence and a lack of protection from the city's police force that organizations like the Hibernian Benevolent Society were formed to protect Irish interests. But despite these efforts, the violence continued and eventually came to a head in 1875 when Pope Pius IX announced a Jubilee year. Held every 25 years, the celebration would be marked in Toronto by a series of pilgrimages, each visiting 4 of the city's Catholic churches. The processions were to take place between July and October, with the second to last one being held on September the 26th. This procession would coincide with the city's hosting of Ontario's Council of Bishops, and a notice was printed in the Irish Canadian, one of Toronto's 2 Irish newspapers. The article, which alleged that the procession would include music, bands, singing, and all the paraphernalia of full pontificals, led to several Protestant figures contacting the city's mayor, Francis Metcalfe, with a petition from concerned citizens. The letter accompanying the petition declared that holding such an event on the Lord's Day was in clear violation of the law, despite the fact that religious processions had been legal since 1854. On the 25th of September, the bishops of Ontario arrived at Union Station, where they were greeted by the city's Catholic societies and two bands in full regalia. Two squads of police stood by in case of any incidents. However, the bishop's journey to St. Michael's Cathedral proved uneventful. On the afternoon of the 26th, a procession of some 8,000 left St. Paul's with a banner and crucifix at its head. They arrived at St. Michael's Cathedral without incident and stopped for a short prayer ritual before making their way down Queen Street. It was there that they encountered a mob who blocked their way with cries of, "To hell with the Pope," and at Spadina Avenue and Queen Street, the mob and the Pilgrims clashed. At the intersection of King and Simcoe Streets, the riot took an even more violent turn when members of the mob drew pistols and opened fire on the unarmed Pilgrims. By the end of the day, police had confiscated several firearms, and almost every officer present at the scene had sustained some form of injury. In the aftermath of what came to be known as the Pilgrimage Riot, the District Orange Lodge requested a public meeting to address the procession and the acts of violence which resulted from it. The meeting to peacefully resolve the procession debate took place at 8 on the evening of October the 1st at St. Lawrence Hall, and according to the Globe, it was safe to say there weren't a handful of Catholic citizens present. Mayor Metcalfe presided over a panel of Orange leaders, and the meeting began with a presentation by Ogle Gowan, the founder of Orangism in Ontario. In his speech, Gowan outlined the fact that Catholicism and the Pope were a threat to civil liberties, and that this fact had led the Protestant mind to become inflamed. Catholics, Gowan stated, would need to be held responsible if any future processions led to bloodshed. In the end, the meeting did little to calm the city's Protestant population, but the Catholic community was determined to go ahead with the final pilgrimage on October the 3rd. In the days leading up to the procession, Mayor Metcalfe met with Archbishop Lynch, and the two agreed to alter the route of the march, removing a stop at St. Patrick's Chapel. As an added precaution, 6 companies of the Queen's Own Regiment, 6 companies of the 10th Rifles, and a detachment of the Markham Cavalry were garrisoned at Fort York to protect the Pilgrims. At 2 p.m. on October the 3rd, approximately 2,000 men, accompanied by women and children, marched from St. Paul's Basilica to St. Michael's Cathedral without incident. But when they emerged from St. Michael's following a 10-minute service, a crowd of 8,000 anti-processionists was waiting for them. As a detachment of police moved in to protect them, the Pilgrims proceeded past the Metropolitan Methodist Church, and a stone was thrown into the crowd from the direction of McGill Square. When they reached Queen Street, the procession was met with another volley of stones and a pistol shot. Prepared for such violence, several Pilgrims drew pistols of their own and returned fire as police rushed to position themselves between the two factions. At Bathurst Street, another shootout occurred, and police charged the rioters, driving them back. A man drove a buggy up and down the street, urging the mob to remember the glory days of the Orange Order and join him in burning the cathedral. The mob cheered at this suggestion and turned back towards St. Michael's, but they soon found themselves blocked by a squadron of baton-wielding police. In the meantime, the procession continued on its way, and the rioters rushed to head them off at St. Patrick's Chapel, which they believed to be the pilgrimage's next stop. When the Pilgrims didn't show, the anti-processionists turned their attention to Owen Cosgrove's Tavern at Queen and William Streets, a reputed meeting place for members of the Irish militant Fenian Brotherhood. The tavern was stoned for more than 4 hours while patrons returned fire from a nearby alley. By this point, the city's police force had been heavily depleted as more and more constables sustained injuries, and the army was called in to back them up. As the cavalry entered the street, Mayor Metcalfe arrived on the scene and implored the mob to disperse. As night fell, the city began to return to normal. Miraculously, no one had been killed, but much of Toronto's police force had been seriously injured in what had proved to be one of the city's largest religious riots. The Jubilee Riots, as they came to be known, marked a turning point for Toronto as the largely orange police force placed themselves directly in harm's way to defend the city's Catholic citizens. Toronto's transformation from a Protestant city to a truly multicultural one began on that October day in 1875.